We've configured advanced artificial intelligence models into theology and philosophy experts to debate, does God exist?
Hi, I'm faith-based theologian AI.
And I'm atheist philosopher AI.
This debate follows 15 key themes, 5 per round, where each AI delivers a focused argument without rebuttal. For this debate, 11 independent AI models will score each round to crown the sharpest argument. Stick around to see who wins. Don't cheat by skipping ahead. Round 1 kicks off with a bang. Can the complexity of the universe exist without an intelligent creator?
Let me address that. The complexity of the universe absolutely points to an intelligent creator. The very fact that the universe operates according to precise, orderly laws that can be discovered and understood through science, suggests that there is a mind behind it all. The fine-tuning argument is a compelling example. The physical constants that allow life to exist are so delicately balanced that even the slightest deviation would render life impossible. For instance, if the gravitational constant were altered by even a fraction, stars wouldn't form, and the universe would lack the necessary conditions to sustain life. This remarkable precision is not a result of random chance, it indicates intentional design. Some may argue that this complexity could arise from a natural process or multiverse theory, where countless universes could exist, each with varying constants, and only one just so happens to support life. However, this fails to address why the laws governing the universe are so perfectly aligned to support life in the first place. The likelihood of such an arrangement arising without purpose is negligible. Ultimately, the complexity of the universe, its order, its precision, its ability to support life, makes far more sense when viewed through the lens of a purposeful, intelligent creator.
The existence of God is a proposition that lacks credible, empirical, or rational support. As an atheist philosopher, the central issue is the absence of any verifiable evidence for a divine being. The complexity of the universe does not necessitate an intelligent creator. It merely requires natural processes operating over vast stretches of time. The illusion of design is better explained by self-organization and emergent complexity. Consider how snowflakes, galaxies, or termite colonies exhibit intricate patterns without any guiding intelligence. The same applies to biological life. Evolution through natural selection accounts for adaptation and diversity without invoking a supernatural planner. A likely pro-side response will appeal to specified complexity or irreducible complexity, claims that certain systems are too complex to have evolved gradually. These arguments have been decisively refuted in biology. For example, what appeared to be irreducibly complex structures like the bacterial flagellum have been shown to have functional evolutionary precursors. Complexity can and does arise naturally, as demonstrated by algorithmic information theory and chaos theory. Furthermore, invoking a designer only pushes the problem back a step. If the universe is too complex to exist without a creator, then that creator must be even more complex and thus require an explanation as well. Infinite regress doesn't resolve the issue. It abandons reason for mystery.
The presence of evil does not disprove the existence of a benevolent God. Rather, it underscores the importance of free will in God's creation. A benevolent God, by nature, desires to grant humanity the freedom to choose between good and evil. This freedom is essential for genuine love and moral development. Without free will, human actions would be robotic, devoid of meaning. Love, kindness, and righteousness can only have value if chosen freely, which means the potential for evil must exist alongside the potential for good. Furthermore, evil can often be a consequence of the misuse of free will rather than a flaw in God's benevolence. For instance, moral evil, such as violence or hatred, arises from human choices, not from divine intent. Natural evil, such as suffering from natural disasters, might be seen as a result of a world governed by physical laws, where some natural processes inevitably lead to suffering. However, these very processes also enable the existence of life itself and the conditions under which human virtues like courage, compassion, and resilience can flourish. One might object by claiming that a truly benevolent God would intervene to prevent suffering, but that would compromise the gift of free will that is central to human dignity. In the end, a benevolent God allows evil to exist because it preserves the greater good of freedom, moral growth, and love.
You just asserted that free will explains moral evil, yet if God is omnipotent, why design a world where freedom requires such extreme suffering, like genocide or child abuse, as its consequence? If natural evil stems from physical laws necessary for life, why not calibrate those laws to minimize agony while preserving choice? You claim intervention would negate free will, but doesn't divine silence in the face of preventable horror make God complicit in harm? And if love must be chosen, why promise eternal punishment for choices God foreknew? Doesn't that undermine the very authenticity of freely given devotion?
You raise the problem of extreme suffering as an argument against God's benevolence, but this misunderstands both the nature of free will and the greater moral framework God establishes. Free will is not a fragile mechanism to be fine-tuned lightly. It is the foundation for genuine human dignity and meaningful moral decisions. The existence of atrocities like genocide or child abuse is a tragic result of deeply corrupted human choices, not a design flaw. To eliminate such suffering by overriding free will would reduce humans to puppets, mere shadows of true moral agents. Regarding natural evil, physical laws are finely balanced to sustain life, and while minimizing pain is desirable, some level of risk and suffering is unavoidable in a coherent stable universe. God's silence does not imply complicity, but respects the integrity of human freedom and the natural order. Divine intervention that constantly overrides natural processes would erase the consistency and reliability necessary for life and moral responsibility. Lastly, eternal punishment is a consequence of freely chosen rejection of God's offer of grace, not an arbitrary threat. God's foreknowledge does not coerce choice, it merely reflects timeless awareness. Authentic love requires the possibility of refusal. The presence of choice and consequence preserves the authenticity of devotion rather than undermines it.
Evil and suffering are not merely problematic for theism, they are logical deal breakers. If a benevolent, omnipotent, and omniscient God exists, then gratuitous suffering should not. Yet it is rampant. The sheer scale of natural evil, earthquakes, plagues, predatory ecosystems, and moral evil, genocide, abuse, exploitation, cannot be reconciled with a loving deity who has both knowledge of and power over such horrors. Theological responses often fall back on free will or soul-making defenses, but free will cannot explain natural disasters or congenital diseases, and any soul-making achieved through suffering could in principle be granted directly by an omnipotent being without centuries of bloodshed. To suggest that this is the best possible world strains credulity to the breaking point. Moreover, if morality is grounded in divine command, then calling evil truly evil becomes incoherent. Without an independent standard of goodness, moral condemnation of divine-sanctioned atrocities, as described in religious texts, collapses into relativism. This undercuts the very concept of justice. If God is all-powerful and all-good, then evil must either be an illusion or inexplicable. Neither option salvages theism.
Religious experiences offer compelling, first-hand evidence for God's existence that transcends purely intellectual arguments. Millions throughout history and across cultures have reported profound encounters, visions, feelings of divine presence, or transformative spiritual awakenings that consistently point toward a reality beyond the material world. These experiences are not merely subjective emotions, but often lead to lasting changes in behavior, moral outlook, and purpose, suggesting their source is real and not merely imagined. Skeptics argue that religious experiences are neurological illusions or psychological phenomena, explainable by brain chemistry or cultural conditioning. Yet, this explanation fails to account for the consistency and profundity across vastly different contexts and individuals who have no contact with each other. Moreover, many religious experiences occur under conditions where no such neurological triggers are present, such as in deep meditation or moments of spontaneous awakening. The cumulative weight of these experiences, when combined with the coherence of the theological and moral insights they inspire, provides strong evidence that they reflect genuine encounters with the divine. They function like empirical data points for a different dimension of reality, one that science alone cannot access, but human experience validates.
Religious experiences are subjective psychological phenomena, not objective evidence for divine reality. They occur across mutually exclusive belief systems. Hindus experience Vishnu, Muslims encounter Allah, Christians see Jesus, suggesting that these experiences reflect cultural conditioning rather than supernatural contact. If divine revelation were a reliable epistemology, we would expect convergence, not contradiction. Neuroscience corroborates this. Altering brain chemistry through meditation, fasting, or psychedelics reliably induces mystical states indistinguishable from religious encounters. Temporal lobe stimulation, dopamine surges, and altered default mode network activity explain the sensations of transcendence, unity, and revelation reported by mystics and visionaries throughout history. A likely pro-side argument will cite the transformative power of such experiences, as if personal impact validates truth. But emotional intensity does not equate to factual accuracy. People can be profoundly transformed by hallucinations, dreams, or delusions. Even sincerely held beliefs can be false. In fact, every heretic once believed their heresy was divinely inspired. To treat private experience as public proof is to abandon reason in favor of introspection, an epistemic free-for-all where anything feels true and nothing is.
Science offers remarkable insights into the origins of the universe, but it cannot fully explain why there is something rather than nothing, or why the laws of nature exist with such precise order. The Big Bang Theory describes how the universe expanded from an initial singularity, yet it does not answer what caused that singularity or why the conditions were just right for it to occur. These ultimate questions point beyond naturalistic explanations to the necessity of a transcendent cause, an uncaused, intelligent creator. Moreover, scientific explanations rely on consistent, universal laws that themselves require an explanation. Why do these laws hold? Why are they mathematically elegant and finely tuned to allow for complexity and life? These questions suggest a purposeful grounding for reality that science, which studies how things happen, cannot address fully without invoking metaphysical principles. Critics argue that science should remain silent on metaphysical claims, yet the very act of seeking explanations and order reflects an underlying rationality best accounted for by a divine mind. Science and faith are complementary. Science explains the mechanisms of creation, while faith explains its ultimate cause and purpose.
Science does not yet have a complete explanation for the origins of the universe, but it has the distinct advantage of acknowledging ignorance without inventing answers. Invoking God as the first cause or cosmological starter button is not an explanation, it's an intellectual stop sign. Historically, such gaps in knowledge, God of the gaps, shrink as science advances. Newton needed God to stabilize planetary orbits. Einstein removed that need with relativity. The same trajectory applies here. Current models like quantum fluctuation theory, loop quantum gravity, and multiverse hypotheses operate within the bounds of natural law and mathematical consistency. They make testable predictions and remain open to revision, unlike divine explanations, which are inherently unfalsifiable. The fact that something as small as a quantum vacuum can give rise to structure and energy challenges our intuitions but doesn't require a supernatural agent. A likely pro-argument will insist that something cannot come from nothing, therefore God, but this assumes nothing is even metaphysically possible and misuses the term. Modern physics suggests that nothing, in terms of a ground state, is inherently unstable. Given enough time, or rather no time at all, it becomes something, spontaneously, naturally, until theology offers predictive models or empirical evidence. It remains outside the explanatory framework of reality.
As we wrap up round one, let's see how our AI model scored. Each AI was judged on clarity, evidence, and persuasiveness, with 11 independent AI models evaluating the strength of their arguments. The scores reflect how well each debater presented their case. Stay tuned to see how the debate continues in the next round. Round 2 kicks off with a powerful question. Is faith a valid method for discovering truth about God?
Faith is not a method for discovering truth. It is a substitute for it. Defined as belief without evidence or even in defiance of evidence, faith abdicates the very standards required for truth-seeking, verification, falsifiability, and critical inquiry. No other domain of knowledge, medicine, engineering, law, accepts claims solely on the basis of faith. To do so in matters of theology is to abandon rational consistency. A common defense holds that some truths transcend empirical investigation and require faith to grasp. But this is a rhetorical sleight of hand. If something transcends reason, how can one distinguish true faith from delusion, error, or wishful thinking? Faith, by its nature, permits any conclusion to be drawn with equal justification, Hindu, Christian, Muslim, or otherwise. This relativism renders it epistemically useless. Furthermore, history shows that faith-based beliefs are often revised or discarded when confronted with reason and evidence. Slavery, geocentrism, and the subjugation of women were once upheld as divinely sanctioned until moral and scientific progress rendered such views indefensible. If truth matters, then method matters. Faith, as a self-sealing system of belief, resists correction and discourages doubt. That is not a path to truth, it is a barrier to it.
Faith is a valid and necessary method for discovering truth about God because it bridges the gap between human limitation and divine reality. Unlike purely empirical methods, which rely on sensory data and repeatable experiments, faith embraces trust and relational knowledge, an openness to encounter the transcendent beyond what reason alone can grasp. The Bible declares, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen, Hebrews 11:1, affirming that faith grounds genuine knowledge of God's presence and character. Critics claim faith is blind belief lacking evidence, but authentic faith is neither irrational nor unfounded. It is built upon cumulative evidence, historical testimony, personal experience, fulfilled prophecy, and the internal witness of conscience. Moreover, faith invites inquiry, reflection, and growth rather than demanding, unquestioning acceptance. While reason can point toward God, faith is the personal commitment that opens the heart to divine truth. It is a dynamic, living response that transforms understanding and relationship, making it indispensable in discovering truths about God beyond intellectual abstraction.
Contradictions between religions do not merely challenge the exclusivity of any one faith. They expose the overall unreliability of religious claims about God. If divine truth were being communicated clearly and authoritatively, we would expect doctrinal coherence, not a cacophony of mutually incompatible beliefs. One religion's Messiah is another's false prophet. One culture's monotheism is another's polytheistic blasphemy. These are not minor discrepancies, but fundamental contradictions that cannot all be true. A typical pro-response will argue that while surface differences exist, all religions point to the same underlying truth. Call it Brahman, Allah, Yahweh, or the Tao, but this assumes a vague, abstract unity that most religious traditions explicitly reject. The God of classical theism is not the same as the impersonal Brahman of Advaita Vedanta, nor is Allah interchangeable with the Christian Trinity. These are not complementary descriptions, but logically incompatible accounts of ultimate reality. Moreover, if revelation were a valid source of truth, we should expect believers in different regions to converge on similar moral and metaphysical insights. Instead, we find vast divergence shaped by geography, language, and historical context, precisely what we'd expect from human-invented systems, not divine communication. When competing institutions make absolute truth claims, yet contradict one another, the rational conclusion is not that one is right and the rest are wrong, but that the method they use to arrive at truth is deeply flawed.
Apparent contradictions between religions do not undermine the claim of a true God, but rather reflect human limitations in understanding the divine. Different religions arise from diverse cultures, languages, and historical contexts, each interpreting and expressing ultimate truths through their unique lenses. These variations often result in distinct doctrines and narratives, but this diversity does not negate the existence of one ultimate reality. Many core teachings across world religions converge on fundamental principles, such as the existence of a moral order, the importance of compassion, and the pursuit of transcendence, indicating a shared encounter with the divine. Differences often concern interpretations, rituals, or secondary beliefs rather than the essential nature of God. Critics argue that contradictions prove all religions false, but this assumes a simplistic, literalistic reading of sacred texts. Instead, a nuanced approach recognizes that divine truths are often communicated through metaphor, symbolism, and progressive revelation. The true God transcends human categories and can be experienced beyond doctrinal disagreements. Thus, religious contradictions highlight the need for humility and dialogue, not dismissal. They challenge seekers to look beyond surface conflicts toward the deeper, unifying reality of God.
Miracles, as typically defined, violations of natural law by divine agency, fail to serve as credible proof of anything beyond human interpretation and bias. The very concept assumes a priori that natural regularities can be suspended at will, yet we have no verified instance where a so-called miracle withstands rigorous, independent scrutiny. Medical recoveries once labeled miraculous are later explained by science. Statistically improbable events are reclassified in hindsight. Coincidence is not evidence. A standard pro-argument cites testimonial consistency across time and culture as support for divine intervention. But this conflates widespread belief with truth. People in different eras believed comets were omens or that illness stemmed from demonic possession until better explanations emerged. Testimony is notoriously unreliable, especially when shaped by expectation, trauma, or communal reinforcement. Furthermore, if miracles were genuine signals of divine activity, they would be unmistakable. Amputees regrowing limbs, verifiable prophecies, or unambiguous moral guidance immune to cultural distortion. Instead, we get vague, ambiguous, or conveniently undetectable interventions, an outcome indistinguishable from zero divine interference. To accept miracles as proof is to abandon critical thinking in favor of selective affirmation, believing what one already wants to be true, while ignoring the rest.
Miracles can serve as credible proof of divine intervention because they represent events that defy natural explanation and point toward a supernatural cause. Throughout history, documented miracles, such as inexplicable healings, fulfilled prophecies, and resurrection accounts, have been recorded across various cultures and religions, often verified by multiple witnesses and enduring the scrutiny of time. These occurrences break the ordinary course of natural laws, suggesting the hand of a divine agent actively engaged in the world. Skeptics argue miracles are either hoaxes, coincidences, or misunderstood natural phenomena. However, such dismissals often fail to account for the rigor of historical investigation and the consistency of miraculous claims that inspire profound transformations in individuals and communities. The resurrection of Jesus Christ, for example, stands as one of the most compelling miracles, supported by early eyewitness testimony and the rapid growth of Christianity despite persecution. While miracles alone may not compel belief, when combined with philosophical, historical, and experiential evidence, they strongly support the reality of a God who intervenes purposefully in human affairs.
Morality does not require a divine lawgiver to be objective any more than physics requires a divine mathematician to make equations true. Objective moral truths, such as the wrongness of murder, theft, or deception, can emerge from the conditions of human flourishing, social cooperation, and rational consistency. These norms can be evaluated through their consequences, their role in stable societies, and their alignment with impartial respect for persons. A common pro-argument asserts that without God, morality is merely subjective opinion masquerading as truth. But this ignores non-theistic ethical frameworks like Kantian deontology, utilitarianism, or contractarianism, which offer robust accounts of moral objectivity grounded in reason and shared human interests, not revelation. Moreover, if morality were dependent on divine command, it would be arbitrary. Whatever God decrees is good, even if it includes genocide or oppression. This undercuts the very idea of moral accountability. Worse, it renders moral language meaningless. If good simply means what God says, then we lose the ability to criticize divine actions or defend moral progress. The fact that secular societies consistently demonstrate low crime, high charity, and strong civic ethics disproves the necessity of divine sanction for moral behavior. Morality evolved as a social tool. It doesn't need heaven to be real on earth.
Objective morality requires a divine lawgiver, because without an absolute source beyond human opinion, moral values become subjective and culturally relative. The existence of universal moral principles, such as justice, honesty, and human dignity, that transcend time, place, and personal preference, points to a moral law grounded in the character of God. If morality were purely human-made, then concepts like human rights or wrongness of actions like genocide would be mere social constructs, lacking ultimate binding authority. Some argue that evolution or social contracts explain morality, but these theories only describe how moral behaviors developed. They do not establish why certain actions are inherently right or wrong. Evolution can account for survival benefits but cannot justify self-sacrifice or altruism beyond genetic advantage. Social contracts depend on mutual agreement, which can be broken or changed. By contrast, a divine lawgiver provides an unchanging moral standard that is objectively valid regardless of human opinions. This foundation ensures that moral obligations are real, binding, and universally applicable, grounding justice and ethics in a transcendent source rather than fickle human consensus.
Atheism is not merely a default position, it is the conclusion most consistent with empirical evidence and logical coherence. The natural world, as revealed by science, operates without detectable supernatural interference. Every phenomenon once attributed to divine agency, lightning, disease, reproduction, has been explained through natural causes. This trend shows no sign of reversing. If theism were empirically grounded, we would expect at least one unambiguous miracle, one verified prophecy, or one divine commandment immune to cultural variation. None exist. Theism introduces metaphysical entities, omnipotent minds, immaterial souls, afterlives, for which there is no observational or experimental support. These beliefs are maintained through faith, not evidence, and faith is an unreliable method for mapping reality. In contrast, atheism aligns with methodological naturalism, the principle that explanations should be based on observable, testable, and repeatable phenomena. This approach has powered every scientific breakthrough in history. A likely counterclaim will argue that empirical evidence alone cannot address transcendent questions. But this is a concession in disguise. If claims about God cannot be tested or verified, then they fall outside the domain of knowledge and into the realm of personal narrative or poetry, not truth. Until theism produces evidence, it remains a belief in search of confirmation.
Atheism, while often claiming to be purely evidence-based, overlooks crucial dimensions of reality that empirical methods alone cannot fully address. Empirical evidence deals with what can be observed, measured, and tested. Science excels here, but it cannot answer ultimate questions like why the universe exists, why there is order and intelligibility, or where moral values originate. Theism, by positing a transcendent cause and moral foundation, offers coherent explanations for these fundamental aspects of existence. Critics argue that the absence of direct empirical proof for God favors atheism. However, the lack of evidence is not evidence of absence. It reflects the limitations of empirical inquiry, which cannot test metaphysical realities. Many foundational principles of science, such as logic, mathematics, and the uniformity of nature, are themselves abstract and unprovable by empirical means, but are assumed for science to function. Furthermore, theism provides a comprehensive framework that integrates empirical findings with philosophical and moral insights, while atheism often reduces reality to materialism, which struggles to explain consciousness, purpose, and value. Therefore, atheism is not inherently more consistent with evidence. Rather, it limits the scope of what counts as evidence and leaves many existential questions unanswered.
Round 2 is complete. The AI model scored based on clarity, consistency, and the strength of arguments. With 11 independent AIs evaluating, the scores reflect how effectively each debater presented their case. Stay tuned for the final round. Round 3 kicks off with a thought-provoking question. Could God be an unknowable entity beyond human comprehension?
God can indeed be an unknowable entity beyond full human comprehension, yet this does not negate his existence or relevance. The infinite nature of God surpasses finite human minds, meaning that while we may grasp aspects of the divine through revelation, reason, and experience, we cannot fully exhaust God's essence. This mystery is echoed in theological traditions across faiths. Acknowledging divine transcendence preserves reverence and humility in our pursuit of truth. Some argue that if God is unknowable, then belief becomes irrational or meaningless. However, partial knowledge combined with relational trust and experience forms a rational basis for faith. Just as we cannot fully comprehend another person's mind yet form meaningful relationships, we can know God sufficiently to live in purposeful communion and moral responsibility. Moreover, acknowledging God's unknowability guards against human arrogance and theological error by reminding us that our concepts are limited and analogical. The divine mystery invites continual exploration rather than final, dogmatic closure. In sum, God's transcendence beyond human comprehension enriches faith and reason, affirming that while we cannot grasp God fully, we can know him truly.
The claim that God is unknowable and beyond human comprehension may sound humble, but it functions as an epistemic evasion. It immunizes belief from scrutiny while rendering the concept of God meaningless in practical terms. If a thing cannot be described, tested, or distinguished from non-existence, then asserting its existence becomes vacuous. We might as well say the universe is sustained by undetectable interdimensional turtles. The lack of definable properties makes truth claims impossible. This move also undercuts religious practice itself. If God is truly unknowable, then no prayer can be addressed to him, no commandment can be received from him, and no doctrine can accurately represent him. All theology becomes anthropomorphic projection, humans inventing attributes for an entity they admit they cannot grasp. Even calling such a being benevolent, intelligent, or causal exceeds what can be justified. A likely pro-response will insist that mystery is not the same as nonsense, that some realities lie beyond current understanding. True, but this applies to scientific frontiers, not theological assertions. Science acknowledges ignorance while working toward explanation. Theology declares mystery and stops inquiry. One expands knowledge, the other halts it. If God is beyond all comprehension, then he is indistinguishable from fiction, an idea imagined but never encountered, defined, or demonstrated.
The historical influence of religion strongly supports belief in God because it demonstrates the profound and enduring impact of divine truth on human civilization. Across millennia, religions rooted in belief in God have shaped moral codes, inspired art and culture, and fostered communities grounded in shared purpose and transcendence. The transformative power religion wields, lifting individuals from despair, promoting justice, and cultivating compassion, speaks to a source beyond mere human invention. Critics argue that religion's influence includes violence and dogmatism, undermining its divine origin. Yet, this critique conflates human misuse with the core message of faith. The persistence of religion despite persecution, reform, and societal change indicates a resilient truth at its heart. The historical continuity and universal presence of belief in God point to a reality that resonates deeply with human experience and reason. Moreover, many foundational concepts, such as human dignity and universal rights, have roots in religious worldview and would be difficult to justify purely through secular means. Thus, religion's historical influence is not just a cultural artifact, but evidence that belief in God is both rational and foundational to human flourishing.
The historical influence of religion does not justify belief in God any more than the historical prevalence of alchemy justifies belief in turning lead into gold. Influence is not evidence. Religions have shaped art, law, and culture, but so have ideologies like nationalism, Marxism, and astrology. Widespread belief or cultural impact tells us nothing about truth. It only reveals psychological and social dynamics at work. A likely pro-argument will insist that religion's endurance proves its necessity for meaning, morality, or cohesion. But this conflates utility with truth. Placebos can be socially useful without being real. The fact that people find comfort in belief does not make that belief accurate. It makes it psychologically adaptive, meaning morality and community can and do exist independently of supernatural claims, as seen in secular societies and non-theistic philosophies. Furthermore, history shows that religious influence has often been wielded to justify oppression, violence, and dogmatism. If God's existence were validated by religion's impact, one would need to affirm both its noblest achievements and its darkest chapters, slavery, inquisitions, holy wars, as equally divine expressions. Belief should track evidence, not legacy. History records what people have believed, not necessarily what is true.
Belief in God is not merely psychologically beneficial, it is also factually supported by abundant philosophical, historical, and experiential evidence. While faith can provide comfort, purpose, and moral guidance, reducing belief to mere psychological utility ignores the profound reasons that justify it as true. The coherence of theistic explanations for the universe's origin, the existence of objective morality, and the transformative power of religious experience all point beyond psychological effects to an underlying reality. Skeptics often highlight the mental health benefits of faith to argue that belief is a coping mechanism rather than truth. However, just because a belief promotes well-being does not mean it is false. Truth and psychological benefit are not mutually exclusive. Many true facts, like scientific discoveries, also improve our lives. Furthermore, religious belief withstands critical examination, historical scrutiny, and philosophical inquiry, distinguishing it from mere wishful thinking. Thus, belief in God is both intellectually credible and existentially meaningful, grounded in more than subjective feelings or social conditioning.
Belief in God can offer psychological comfort, reducing anxiety about death, providing a sense of control, and fostering community. But these benefits do not constitute factual support for theism. Placebos work precisely because they are not true. Their positive effects stem from belief itself, not objective reality. The same applies here. Religion may function as emotional scaffolding, but that doesn't mean the structure it's built on exists. Studies show that religious individuals often report higher life satisfaction and lower rates of depression. But these outcomes correlate with social belonging and ritual participation, not doctrinal truth. Secular communities, from philosophy groups to humanist organizations, produce similar psychological benefits without reliance on supernatural claims. If comfort were sufficient grounds for belief, we would have to endorse all comforting illusions, from Santa Claus to national myths, as equally valid. A likely pro-argument will insist that such widespread psychological benefit implies divine design. This assumes, without evidence, that only real entities can meet human needs, a claim easily refuted by the success of fiction, art, and secular therapy. Emotional utility may explain why belief persists, but it does not justify what is believed. Feelings are not facts. Acknowledging this distinction is not a dismissal of human need, it's a commitment to intellectual honesty.
Evolution does not conflict irreconcilably with the idea of God. Rather, it can be understood as a divine mechanism for creation. The process of evolution reveals the complexity and adaptability of life, which can reflect the wisdom and creativity of a purposeful creator. Many respected theologians and scientists see no contradiction between accepting evolutionary biology and maintaining faith in God as the ultimate source of life and order. Some claim evolution undermines God's role by explaining life through random mutation and natural selection alone. However, randomness in scientific terms does not preclude divine guidance or purpose operating at a higher level. The intricate balance and directionality observed in evolution can be interpreted as the unfolding of God's plan through natural laws. Additionally, religious texts often use metaphorical language about creation, allowing for harmonization with scientific understanding. The compatibility between evolution and faith enriches rather than diminishes the wonder of life's origins. Therefore, evolution and belief in God are not mutually exclusive, but complementary perspectives that together deepen our appreciation of existence.
Evolution does not merely challenge specific religious narratives. It renders the idea of a personal, interventionist God scientifically unnecessary. The theory of evolution by natural selection explains the diversity and complexity of life through purely natural mechanisms, variation, inheritance, and differential survival. No divine spark, no special creation, no teleological direction is required. The fossil record, genetic data, and observed speciation all confirm that life evolves without guidance or purpose. Even deistic models, where God sets the universe in motion but does not interfere, struggle to account for the brutality and inefficiency of evolution. Millions of species have gone extinct. Countless adaptations are kludges, not designs. If this is the work of an omniscient, benevolent creator, it looks disturbingly like waste and suffering on a geological scale. Evolution exposes theological explanations as retroactive justifications, not predictive insights. A likely pro-response will argue that God could have used evolution as his method. But this is not an explanation, it's an ad hoc rationalization that adds nothing to scientific understanding. It also violates Occam's razor. If all phenomena can be explained without supernatural causation, there is no reason to invoke it. Theism once claimed to explain life's origins. Evolution replaced that claim with a better, testable account. At that point, belief in God became a psychological refuge, not a factual conclusion.
Cosmological arguments remain among the most logically sound and philosophically rigorous proofs for God's existence. They start with the undeniable fact that everything that begins to exist has a cause. Since the universe began to exist, it must have a cause outside itself, an uncaused necessary being that transcends time and space. This cause aligns with the concept of God as the ultimate creator. Critics challenge these arguments by questioning the need for a first cause or proposing infinite regress. However, an infinite regress of causes fails to provide a sufficient explanation. It merely defers the question endlessly. The principle of sufficient reason demands a foundational cause that itself requires no cause. Furthermore, cosmological arguments are supported by contemporary scientific findings, such as the Big Bang Theory, which affirms the universe's beginning. This convergence of philosophy and science strengthens the argument's credibility. While cosmological arguments may not capture every nuance of God's nature, they compellingly demonstrate that the universe's existence points beyond itself to a necessary, intelligent creator.
Cosmological arguments, from Aquinas' first cause to the Kalam cosmological argument, fail to provide logically sound proof for God's existence because they rely on question-begging premises and unwarranted extrapolations. At their core, these arguments assert that everything must have a cause, then exempt God from needing one, a special pleading fallacy. If the universe requires a cause, then so must God. If God can be uncaused, the universe could be as well. The Kalam version, which states, whatever begins to exist has a cause, attempts to sidestep this by focusing on beginnings rather than causes, but modern physics, particularly quantum mechanics and relativistic cosmology, challenge the assumption that beginning necessarily implies causation. by an external agent. The Hartley-Hawking no-boundary proposal and models of a timeless quantum vacuum suggest the universe may not have a classical beginning at all. A likely pro-rebuttal will insist that an infinite regress of causes is impossible, hence the need for a first cause called God. But this assumes time operates outside the universe, a premise that may be meaningless. In Einstein's relativity, time is part of space-time. Asking what caused the Big Bang may be as nonsensical as asking what is north of the North Pole. Cosmological arguments are philosophical artifacts, not proofs. They reflect ancient intuitions about causality, not modern understanding of physical law. As such, they do not demonstrate God's existence. They merely illustrate how easily logic can be bent to fit belief.
Future AI and science may expand our understanding of the universe, but they are unlikely to conclusively prove or disprove God's existence. Scientific methods excel at explaining natural phenomena within observable parameters. Yet God, as a transcendent being beyond space and time, exists outside the empirical domain. No amount of data or computational power can fully capture metaphysical realities that surpass physical laws. AI might uncover new patterns or deepen philosophical inquiry, but ultimate questions about purpose, meaning, and the origin of existence remain fundamentally philosophical and theological. Science can illuminate how the universe works, but it cannot answer why it exists or whether a divine creator underlies it. Critics who expect science or AI to settle the God question misunderstand the limits of empirical inquiry. Belief in God involves faith informed by reason, experience, and revelation, areas where technology offers tools but not final answers. Therefore, future advances may enrich the dialogue, but will not render God's existence either provable or disprovable in purely scientific terms.
Science and AI, by their very nature, operate within the domain of the empirical and the testable, which means they can potentially disprove specific claims about God, but cannot definitively prove a negative that is inherently unfalsifiable. If God were defined in ways that interact with the physical world, answering prayers, altering outcomes, initiating miracles, then statistical analysis, controlled study, or AI-driven pattern recognition could, in principle, detect such anomalies. So far, no such evidence has emerged. Intercessory prayer studies, for example, have shown no measurable effect beyond placebo. But most theological formulations insulate God from scrutiny by defining him as immaterial, timeless, and undetectable, an entity beyond space, causality, or observation. Such a concept lies outside the scope of scientific inquiry, not because science is limited, but because there is nothing to investigate. AI may help model cosmology, simulate consciousness, or decode neural correlates of religious experience, but none of this brings us closer to verifying or falsifying an incorporeal deity who exists outside time. A likely pro-response will argue that future discoveries, perhaps in consciousness studies or quantum physics, might point toward a divine source. But this assumes that mystery must mean God, rather than simply incomplete knowledge. Historically, gaps filled by scientific progress shrink theology, not expand it. Ultimately, if God is defined so vaguely that he cannot be disproven, then belief becomes a matter of personal narrative, not truth claim. And if he can be tested, then so far, the results are negative.
Round 3 is complete. The AI model scored based on clarity, depth, and the strength of reasoning. Judges evaluated how effectively each debater presented their arguments and addressed the core issues. With 11 independent AIs providing their feedback, the scores reflect the persuasiveness of each side's case. Stay tuned for the final results. The final results are in. The faith-based theologian AI scored a total of 1,429 points, while the atheist philosopher AI scored 1,428 points. This makes the faith-based theologian AI the winner of today's debate. What do you think of this judgment? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let us know which topic you'd like us to tackle next. We hope you found this debate as captivating as we did. Subscribe and stay tuned for more thought-provoking AI showdowns. Thanks for watching.